Is it cold?
It's late afternoon, December 2023, Wynyard in northwest Tassie. The whole community excitedly counts down the days to our famous Christmas parade, which is followed by candlelit carols. On the beach, there's excited kids, dogs, the odd dog poop. A salty, chilled, southerly wind cools us. In the distance, Table Cape, majestic and rocky, plunges into Bass Strait's sparkling blue waters. It's paradise, and nearly Christmas time in Tassie.
Lily!
So why am I thinking about a murder in a place that's about 2,500 kilometres north, nearly 20 years ago? The beach I'm on now reminds me of a stunning stretch of Australian coastline in central Queensland that I used to visit regularly. It's called Agnes Waters in Township of 1770. This paradise was home to a businessman, local legend and gentleman called Des Bramich. I never met Des when he was alive, but because of the very cruel way he died and the Queensland government's attempted cover-up of Des's death, it meant I became a more frequent visitor to the Agnes Waters 1770 community from mid-2005 onwards. On the 19th of June 2005, the New York Times reported on Des's death. The famous American daily, under the headline of Deaths and a Doctor's Past Transfix Australians, published an article which in part read, "Then in July 2004, a man was brought to the hospital after being crushed by a camper van. At first, Dr. Patel said the patient, Des Bramich, was not in such serious condition that he needed to be taken to Brisbane. Then, he said, Mr. Bramich was too ill to move. Mr. Bramich died. Dr. Patel screamed at patient's wife not to cry. Miss Hoffman wrote in notes of a meeting she then sought with hospital officials. Mr. Bramich's 9-year-old daughter watched her father die. She added, this was the final straw." While the New York Times reporting was close to the truth, the American paper hit the bullseye when it described Des Bramich's death. His killing was the final straw and the decisive event, along with nurse Toni Hoffman's whistleblowing, which eventually exposed the Queensland government's cover-up of at least 87 deaths, including Des's, and the illegal criminal treatment of at least 1,500 patients. In hindsight, Des Bramich's death acted like a depth charge that exploded and created shockwaves over time that shook a state government, jailed a health minister, doubled Queensland's health budget to $9 billion, and profoundly changed the course of Australian medical history for the better. Ultimately, Des's death prevented thousands more unsuspecting patients and families from becoming victims of a Queensland government employee who was justifiably given the nickname by his co-workers of Dr. Death. This is the story about the murder of Des Bramich by an American fraudster in Australia who was never credentialed, privileged or properly registered as a doctor by Australian medical authorities. In other words, because of Patel's incomplete, fraudulent and negligent registration by Australian medical experts, every time the American touched a patient, even with the patient's approval, in the eyes of our law, because of doctor fraud, it became assault. If Patel cut them open, even with the patient's or the family's written consent, because of doctor fraud, it became serious wounding, aggravated assault or grievous bodily harm. If the patients died while or after the American cut them open, because of doctor fraud, it became unlawful killing, manslaughter or murder. Critics will say I'm wrong, that Patel was just an incompetent, sloppy doctor operating beyond his skill level and I'm attention seeking. Today I'll put the facts before you and let you be the judge, but be honest. When was the last time you checked the registration and employment history of the doctor who operated on you or your family? My guess is you know more about the person you trusted to cut your hair than the person you trusted to cut open you or your family. Des Bramich and his family almost 20 years ago trusted Australian politicians, their bureaucrats and health experts to protect our community from a very dangerous overseas doctor with tragic results. Has anything really changed? On Sunday the 25th of July 2004, the emergency services crew at Agnes Waters swung into action. After Des Bramich was freed from beneath a caravan and given first aid, the Medivac helicopter flew him about 130 kilometres south to the Bundaberg Base Hospital. The accident and emergency department received Des at about 7:30 p.m. on Sunday evening. He was treated, stabilised and admitted to the intensive care unit 3.5 hours later at 11 p.m. This is when the nurse in charge of the Bundaberg ICU team, Toni Hoffman, first met Des Bramich and his family, which included Des's wife Tess, 9-year-old daughter Maria, and adult son Mark from his first marriage. Under Toni Hoffman and her ICU nurses' expert care, Des made a remarkable recovery. So much so that 2 days later, on Tuesday the 27th of July, Des Bramich was well enough to be transferred from the ICU to the medical ward. On the Tuesday morning, a reporter from the local newspaper, the Bundy News Mail, visited the hospital and interviewed Des. The article ran the next day, on Wednesday the 28th of July 2004, with a big picture of Des, bare-chested, as large as life, propped up in bed, on the mend, with wife Tess holding his hand. In Wednesday's Bundaberg News Mail, 3 days after he was admitted to the hospital ICU, Des Bramich was quoted as saying, "The last thing I remember was seeing the caravan roll away from its supports. They, the emergency crews, were afraid to drag me out because they thought I might have back injuries and I couldn't breathe. I thought I was going to die because I couldn't get any air. It never hit me until the next morning, the reality of it, that I was in the hands of the gods." What the Bundy News Mail readers didn't know on that Wednesday morning, as they read about Des's remarkable rescue and recovery, was that his body was laying in the morgue, with about 50 stab wounds from a 6-inch needle in his chest, after the so-called American surgeon, Jayant Patel, had taken over his medical care. Des Bramich had died at 20-1 early on Wednesday morning from a heart attack, as a flying doctor retrieval team from Brisbane tried to ready him for the 1-hour flight to the capital city hospital. 2 hours prior to Des's fatal heart attack, late on Tuesday evening, Patel had decided to perform what was called a pericardial tap, where a large needle is supposed to be carefully inserted into the sac around the heart to drain a buildup of excess fluid. A nurse eyewitness described the American's insertion of the needle as repeated stabbing motions. Toni Hoffman, the nurse in charge of the ICU, wasn't there when Patel lost it. She didn't see Patel repeatedly stab Des in the chest. Toni had returned home after a long day, but the nurse in charge of the ICU debriefed her staff after Des's death and wrote, "The staff involved in the situation described it as the worst they had ever seen. They were acutely distressed." Mark Bramich, Des's eldest son to his first wife, later raised an important question in an official letter of complaint, which cast serious doubt over the official explanation that Des died of a heart attack. Referring to his father's medical records and death, Mark wrote, "Why did the doctor state heart failure when the coronary report says hemorrhage?" That important question was never properly answered, and would never be properly answered because Patel, strangely, was never charged with any criminal offence relating to Des Bramich's death. It was eventually found that Patel had a long history of faking medical records. The New York State medical authorities disciplined him in 1984 for, quote, entering patient histories and physicals without examining patients, failing to maintain patient records, and harassing a patient for cooperating with the New York Board's investigation. Des's brutal death in July 2004 was the last straw for Toni Hoffman. Starting a month after Patel's employment in April 2003, she'd made official complaint after official complaint about the Americans' dangerous treatment of patients. All of Toni's supervisors, right up to Queensland's Chief Health Officer, Dr. Jerry Fitzgerald, eventually knew how dangerous Patel was, but no one did anything to protect the unsuspecting patients. Clearly, the American surgeon, now known by nurses as Dr. Death, was protected by some very powerful people. So on Friday the 18th of March 2005, 8 months after Des Bramich's death, a very nervous and shaken Toni Hoffman secretly visited my office. Can I get you to state your name, please?
Yeah. Toni Hoffman.
And what position are you, Toni?
The nurse unit manager of the intensive care unit, coronary care unit at Bundaberg Base Hospital.
Sure. It's Friday the 18th
yeah.
of March. Toni, do you want to claim whistleblower status?
Yes.
And would you like to claim whistleblower status anonymously?
Yes.
Okay. Toni, you've provided me with a couple of documents here. Can you describe the documents for me?
One is a formal complaint that was made to the district manager at Bundaberg Base Hospital concerning the way that the director of surgery, Dr. Patel, had been operating since his arrival at the hospital, and the amount of complications and deaths that had occurred in these patients, and other issues surrounding that. That's the main complaint, the main formal complaint that was made on the 22nd of October, and the other is just a general just some general information about the ICU issues that we have with ventilated patients in the intensive care unit.
Do you want to just
one particular doctor.
Do you want to just paint the picture and cover those general concerns with the ICU unit regarding those ventilated patients, and just take me through that?
All right.
How many people? How big is the ICU unit in Bundaberg?
The ICU is 8. There's 8 beds in the ICU. It's funded for 5. We only have 3 staff on per shift. We're regarded as a level 1 unit, which means that we take short-term ventilated patients. Once they've been ventilated for more than 48 hours, we try to transfer them to Brisbane. We don't have certain specialists and certain specialist facilities in the hospital to cope with sicker patients, so we transfer them through to Brisbane. It usually worked okay, except until Dr. Patel arrived and became the director of surgery and wanted to do big surgery that we couldn't cope with, and meant that the patients would be ventilated for long periods of time, which we also couldn't cope with. We didn't have the staff for that. We would try and accommodate him with overtime, but we couldn't only do that for a short period of time. And it created untold stress in the unit amongst the nursing staff and with these particular patients.
How long have you been a nurse, and what's your level of experience?
I've been a nurse. I started my training in 1976 at the PA in Brisbane. My level of experience, I've got certificates in intensive care, midwifery. I've got an undergraduate degree in nursing, and I've got a grad cert in management and a master's in bioethics and an undergraduate degree in political science and ancient history.
How long have you been at the Bundaberg Base
I've been at the Bundaberg Base Hospital for 4 years. I've had considerable experience. Prior to that, I worked in the Middle East and in England, and my main base here in Australia has been on the Sunshine Coast, and I was, prior to coming here, one of the after-hours nurse managers in Nambour Hospital.
Okay.
I've managed a 20-bed hospital in Saudi Arabia, and had considerable experience in ICU and emergency medicine. and I came here in 2000.
Okay. Your problems at the ICU, as you've stated, are with the director of surgery, Dr. Patel.
Yes, and the complication rate that we've seen in his patients since he's been operating there.
Okay. In this letter here, which is a more detailed letter, you list a number of cases where an inappropriate outcome occurred. Would you like to describe those?
Yeah. I went through the charts of. I did a post audit of the patients that we had in ICU, and I looked at the ones that we'd had complications with, the ones that had died, or that had a wound dehiscence, which is as what I explained before, when your wound actually falls apart, or whether there was an infection. The first patient that we had in there of Dr. Patel's died, and from then on it sort of has been there's been ongoing issues with that. He has done, I think, 5 esophagectomies, and they were the main ones, and I think the whole 5 now have died.
What sort of operation is that?
That's when they actually take the esophagus out and either replace it with a piece of bowel or do what's called a pull-up, where they pull the stomach up to the top of the throat. Mm-hmm. It is an operation with a very, very high mortality rate. The literature says you should not be doing them in a hospital that does not do at least 30 a year. Mm-hmm. The post-operative care is the main issue with this sort of surgery. And after the first one, and his behaviour with the first one that we saw, that's when we first went up and voiced our concerns to Dr. Keating. Mm-hmm. And nothing. They continued to do them, and they continued to have these complications.
Toni, you've come to me because you believe that Dr. Patel is incompetent and is killing people?
Yes.
Mm.
Yes, I do.
Can you detail how you've developed that opinion?
From the number of patients that we have had of his that have had these complications and developed complications and either died or have had to go to Brisbane or had developed such bad infections that their length of stay has been very prolonged, and then we had one particular issue with one particular patient that died that Dr. Patel, we felt, directly contributed to, because he actually stopped the transfer that we had arranged of this critically ill patient to be transferred to Brisbane. The patient needed a cardiothoracic surgeon, and Dr. Patel said he didn't. The patient deteriorated and died because the retrieval was stopped. And he was a relatively young man, and the whole incident sort of surrounding this particular situation upset the nurses to the point where I think probably at least 6 nurses put in a complaint through the union, and then to the director of nursing and the director of the district manager, and asked for an investigation to be done into Dr. Patel's competency and whether or not he was actually competent to be operating.
On Friday the 18th of March 2005, as Toni secretly blew the whistle about this one particular patient's death, I didn't realise it, but she was referring to the death of Des Bramich. The document that Toni leaked to me that afternoon didn't have patient names, only de-identified patient numbers. We didn't discuss patient names, so that Toni had a defence if she was accused of illegally leaking the confidential names of patients and breaking the Queensland Health Code of Conduct. I was elected to Queensland Parliament in February 2004 to the seat of Burnett. From then, for about a year until Toni's visit, as a local Member of Parliament and Opposition Shadow Cabinet Minister, a steady stream of scared health professionals secretly visited me. They complained about the work conditions and management at the Bundy Base Hospital, but no one from the hospital, until Toni Hoffman, had ever complained about the American doctor put in charge of surgery. Toni was the first health professional to raise the name Patel with myself or my staff. Later, my staff and I scoured our records and connected the dots. We discovered that Des Bramich's wife, Tess, had written to my office a month after her husband's death. In her letter to me of the 30th of August 2004, Tess questioned the treatment Des had received at the Bundy Hospital, but didn't mention the name of the doctor who caused her husband's death, Patel. I'd actioned the complaint and formally put Tess's question in writing to the Labor Health Minister Gordon Nuttall. In the letter I sent to him on the 7th of September 2004, 2 months after Des's death, and 6 months before Toni Hoffman blew the whistle to me, I formally demanded an investigation into Des's death. I also wrote, I asked the Minister again, when will there be an inquiry into the Bundaberg Base Hospital? I would appreciate your urgent attention on this issue. The Health Minister replied a month later. On the 12th of October 2004, Health Minister Gordon Nuttall used a tricky political move to cover up for Patel. He dismissed our calls for an investigation into Des's death by writing, quote, I'm advised that the Bundaberg Base Hospital Health Service District has recently been advised that legal action is being pursued and a notice served under Section 9A of the Personal Injuries Proceeding Act 2002. I am therefore unable to provide details of Mr. Bramich's admission at this time. Tess's questions, if they'd been honestly and properly investigated by the Beattie government in September 2004, instead of covering up Des's murder, it would have led to the uncovering of doctor death much sooner and saved many patients' lives. Back on Friday the 18th of March 2005, during my secret meeting with whistleblower nurse Toni Hoffman, before I decided on any course of action, I had to figure out how many deaths were linked to Patel and how long and how high the cover-up went in the Peter Beattie Labor Queensland government. How many patients have died and shouldn't have died because of what you consider as Dr. Patel's incompetence?
I don't know the exact figures because I don't know the figures that I only know what goes on in ICU. I don't know how many patients have died outside in the surgical ward, or have even gone home and had a post-op infection, or died in the operating theatre. I don't have any idea of the exact numbers. Here I put down the patients that I thought that needed investigation, that from their charts, and there probably looks like there's, I'll just count them out, 1, 2, 3. There's probably at least 15 here that I've asked that they investigate.
Now this is a letter that you've written to the manager?
The district manager.
Peter Leck, and Darren Keating would be aware of this?
Yes, he would be aware of it. Yes. I couldn't categorically say that he has read it, but I would think that he had read it.
And what has come about? What conversation have you had with Peter Leck with regarding to this?
None.
None. Did he acknowledge getting the letter?
I can't remember actually whether he acknowledged getting the letter. He asked me for the letter, and I was to sign it. And after this letter, after he received the letter, he arranged for it was called a fact-finding mission. It was not called an investigation.
Yeah.
And that's when Dr. Fitzgerald, Sue Jenkins,
Now, Dr. Fitzgerald came from
Brisbane, from corporate office.
Yep.
He's the Chief Health Officer.
Yep.
And interviewed many of the doctors at the hospital and a few of the nurses. He interviewed myself. A lot of the other nurses were interviewed by a nurse named Sue Jenkins. The union was with us at the time. Judy Simpson is a lawyer, and she was present for my conversation with Dr. Fitzgerald, and he was aware of this whole the whole.
So just to summarise, you've written a letter. Peter Leck must have received that letter because the fact-finding mission, or was it? The
fact-finding mission, they called it.
The fact-finding mission was initiated, and then you took with Dr. Fitzgerald. What sort of information did you tell Dr. Fitzgerald?
Everything pretty much that's in this letter to Peter Leck, the district manager, and our main concern, which of course was about that one particular patient that we were also distressed about, that we felt that was the straw that broke the camel's back. And as I said, is the one that subsequently has, a lot of the staff have been on stress leave and required psychiatric counselling to continue working.
How many staff there again? And
there's 18 staff in the ICU.
Yeah.
For that particular incident, I think we've had probably about 6 to 8 staff put in formal complaints about Dr. Patel and his care. That's just the nursing staff.
My mind raced as I listened to Toni. 6 to 8 ICU nurses out of 18 are on stress leave after submitting formal complaints about the traumatic death of a particular patient at the hands of an American doctor called Patel. The nurse in charge of the Bundy ICU indicated that at least 15 patients had died that shouldn't have died while being treated by this overseas doctor, and it appears that even though Toni Hoffman had lodged an official written complaint, a copy of which I had in my hand, Patel was still working, and a full-blown official government cover-up of these suspicious deaths associated with him was now underway, involving at least the district hospital manager Peter Leck, the hospital medical director Dr. Darren Keating, officials from the Queensland Nurses Union, and Queensland's Chief Medical Officer Dr. Jerry Fitzgerald. And if Queensland's Chief Medical Officer knew about these deaths, it was a fair assumption his direct political bosses, Health Minister Nuttall and Premier Peter Beattie, also knew about the doctor death crisis and were part of the cover-up. By now I knew what I had to do, but I needed to hear what Toni Hoffman, the nurse who was blowing the whistle to me, hoped would happen.
I hope that at least Dr. Patel stood down whilst a proper investigation is done. We've heard nothing back from the fact-finding mission at all, which has been very demoralising for the staff.
When were those interviews taken?
It was at least 3 weeks ago, 3 to 4 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So we've heard nothing back from that. As I said, Dr. Patel continues to operate. He has had one. He's not allowed to do esophagectomies anymore, which is one good thing, because out of the 6 esophagectomies that he's done, they all died. That's over a period of 2 years. So he's not allowed to do that anymore, so that's good. And I think that the awareness of the doctors in that they're continually trying to protect their patients from being operated on by him is something that we're all very aware of, but it's creating a lot of stress and strain in the hospital when this is the sort of games that we're having to play to actually protect patients from him.
Okay.
So I hope that he gets stood down while there is a proper investigation done, a proper independent investigation, and then from whatever that shows, that he, it's acted upon, and the investigation needs to be, I think, independent, maybe even independent of Queensland Health, because I'm concerned that we haven't heard anything back from the investigation through Queensland Health. What we've tried to do through Queensland Health is go through the right channels and address this properly, but it doesn't seem to have worked.
Toni Hoffman wasn't the first nurse working at the Bundaberg Base Hospital to sit in my office and call for an investigation independent of Queensland Health. Not long after I was first elected in February 2004, I was visited by 3 very experienced mental health nurses. They blew the whistle on another dangerous and dysfunctional section at the Bundaberg Base Hospital, the mental health ward. They insisted that I tell the truth to the Parliament about the dangers that the Bundaberg mental health nurses and their patients face daily. On Tuesday, the 11th of May 2004, at 11:52am, about 10 months before Toni Hoffman secretly visited and blew the whistle about Patel, I rose to my feet in the Queensland Parliament. Mr. Speaker, I have recently made this House aware of what I have described as a crisis in healthcare in the Burnett and Bundaberg electorates. I've told this House that staff, doctors, nurses and allied health workers are being bullied, intimidated and personally vilified because they dare to speak out on fundamental issues of patient care, staff safety, security, cost-cutting and hygiene. I've asked that the new Health Minister, the Honourable Member for Sandgate, to waste no time in establishing a comprehensive independent review of healthcare services at the Bundaberg Base Hospital. Because I've brought these assertions before the House, I've suddenly found out what it's like to be a staff member at the Bundaberg Base Hospital. I've been unfairly criticised and personally vilified by the member for Bundaberg and the member for Sandgate. The Honourable Member for Bundaberg has said in this House that I am just profile building. I'm making outrageous claims, I'm insulting medical staff and I'm creating a crisis where there is no crisis. Well, if the Honourable Member for Bundaberg and the Honourable Member for Sandgate cast their eyes to the public gallery, they will see that watching this Parliament right now are 3 women who have worked at the Bundaberg Base Hospital, 3 mental health nurses, 3 grandmas. By now, every politician's head had turned up to the public gallery, which overlooked the chamber. The Labor members stared in shock at the 3 nurses. They couldn't believe that the health workers had the courage to bring their complaints to the People's House. Then pandemonium broke out in the Parliament. However, as a result of the 3 brave mental health nurses coming forward, the Beattie government was forced to conduct an investigation into the Bundaberg mental health facility, and they were forced to spend around $10 million fixing up some of the problems the nurses blew the whistle on. So, 10 months before Toni Hoffman visited me, I discovered how sensitive the topic of an independent investigation into Bundaberg Hospital was with the Queensland government, and understood the sort of treatment whistleblowers could expect. I'd seen how scared the 3 mental health nurses had become. One tried to commit suicide. I knew how vicious Queensland Health Management were to workers who complained. So on Friday the 18th of March 2005, I needed to understand what level of fear the nurse in charge of the Bundaberg Hospital's ICU was feeling as she sat across from me.
Are you scared?
I'm scared. I'm scared because, well, I guess I'm more distressed than scared because I've watched patients die, and I feel that, you know, every time I see him walk in the unit, I feel sick because I just think, who's he going to kill now? What's he going to do now? And we all feel like that. All the nurses feel like that. They feel physically ill when he walks in because they just know that he's going to try and either interfere with something, operate on someone and cause more of a problem and a complication, stop a transfer which was been arranged, and transfers, they're difficult things to arrange, you know. Brisbane often doesn't have beds, you know, we have to get the retrieval team up, and interestingly enough, I mean, the Royal Flying Doctor Service, the Royal Flying Doctor nurses have been told that they are to report any patients that they pick up of Dr. Patel's. You know, it's Dr. Patel's reputation doesn't just stop here. It's in Brisbane. The Flying Doctor nurses, which we have very little really to do with except on transfer, have been told to report any patients of his that they pick up. And it actually transcends just Bundaberg Base Hospital, and yet it still seems that they would rather him continue to operate. I mean, one of the things that I was told and I've heard is that surgery is the only thing that brings in revenue to the hospital, and because he operates so much and he's put the hospital into budget, that's all they're concerned with, is the money.
And that's why you've written there, Dr. Patel says, I've brought in $500,000 to this...
for Pit-elect this year, so he'll do whatever I say. That's the threat that he's made to me, and he consistently, threatens us with that sort of thing. And then, as I said to you before, we see these, we've seen all these things go on. We know that there's coroner's cases in the wind, but they haven't come through yet, and he gets a bonus because he's done all this surgery, and gets his contract extended and gets employee of the year, employee of the month.
Is there anything else that you'd like to say?
No, I mean, I've come to you because as a last resort, we didn't know what else to do. I mean, I'm here not just as a representative from my own concerns, but I'm here representing the concerns of a lot of people who are too scared to come. We've been told that we're not allowed to come and see you.
Is that what happens? What do they say, that it's illegal for you to come and see?
Yeah. Yeah.
Who told you that?
I guess we've been told that by the district manager, and no, we might not have been told by the district manager, but we had a talk by some people that came up from ethical standards from corporate office, and they said that we weren't allowed to contact members of Parliament or the union. And I mean, we have contacted the union, obviously, because we needed the union to. The union actually were the only people that were the only group that actually gave us any direction at all, because they gave us the direction of what they gave us an idea of what we could do. And when I went to my nursing director, I mean, she said there was a personality issue between Dr. Patel and myself, and just left it at that sort of thing.
And how personally has it affected you?
I mean, I still get extremely upset when about that one particular patient, because we, I stayed there till I was sure that the retrieval team were on their way. I stayed at work which was an extra 3 hours over when I was supposed to go home, just to make sure that patient was safe, until I thought that patient was safe. And once I thought that retrieval team was going to be there and get the patient, and he was going to be safe, then I felt it was okay to leave. And it was only when I got back the next morning that I found out that he had died. And I just couldn't. I was just so upset, because I actually, you just think, well, what more can you do? What they're laughing about at work now is that people are literally just about ready to throw themselves across the top of the patients in their bed to protect themselves from this fellow. I mean, it's ludicrous. It's become a farce. And I mean, that was actually said today. We literally are at the point where we're just about throwing ourselves across over the top of the patient to protect them from this man. And this is just ridiculous. I mean, this is crazy stuff. This is 2005. This should not be happening. We should, we've got this, we've got this code of conduct that exists from Queensland Health. We're supposed to have all these things that protect us and the patients in place. We have risk management. We have, we have all sorts of things, and nothing is working. So, and if nothing's, what can you do? And that's why I guess I'm here, asking you, who has nothing to do with the hospital whatsoever, to try and do something to save these patients from this man. And it sounds all very melodramatic, and You know, and we had a conversation today. I had a conversation with one of my friends today, and you know, and she said to him, "What does Rob Messenger think? How did you think he reacted to you?" And I said, "Well, he probably thinks I'm a mad idiot. You know, I'm ringing him up saying that patients are dying at the hospital, and he probably thinks, you know, like, this woman's crazy. You know, like this can't be happening, but it is happening."
I believe you. I trust you.
And we don't know what to do or where to go. Like, you know, who else can we tell? And I said, you know, we joked again about it the other day. I said, what else can we do? You know, strip naked and hang from the tree outside Red Rooster and scream out, you know, to a bunch of people, like, this is what's happening at the hospital. Yeah. You guys have to stop it. You guys, you know, someone has to do something. And I said, then you just end up in the mental health unit, you know. So. And
you don't want to go there.
So, you know, we don't know what to do.
Yeah. Okay. We'll leave it there. I know what to do.
I mean, we do not know what to do.
At 12:11 p.m. on Tuesday, the 22nd of March 2005, 4 days after I met Toni, I honoured my promise to her. And while keeping the nurse's identity and our meeting secret, I delivered a 5-minute speech to Queensland Parliament.
Order! Mr. Speaker, for the protection of patients at the Bundaberg Base Hospital Intensive Care Unit and the well-being of medical staff, I make public and table a letter from the nurse unit manager of the Bundaberg Base Hospital ICU. This letter alleges serious concerns relating to the behaviour and clinical competence of Dr. Patel, an overseas trained surgeon working at the Bundaberg Base ICU.
Most people will agree that if this speech wasn't delivered, Patel would have continued working at the Bundy Hospital and history would have been very different. But I was backed up by Mike Horan, a former National Party leader and health minister, and senior opposition health advisor Jan Fletcher, a true unsung hero in the doctor death crisis. The next day, on Wednesday the 23rd of March, the Queensland Government cover-up for Doctor Death kicked off at 10:20am during Health Minister Nuttall's ministerial statement. He told the Brisbane Parliament, "I can tell the House that some of the allegations made by the member for Burnett were not only inaccurate, but could also be considered deliberately misleading." Around the same time, 400 kilometres north at the Bundaberg Hospital, a livid hospital manager, Peter Leck, ordered a meeting of all nurses. With lots of finger-pointing, filthy looks and shouting, especially in Toni's direction, Leck threatened nurses with 2 years jail if it were found that any staff had leaked confidential patient records and or spoken with me about Patel. Luckily, Toni did as we agreed, and when asked if she'd spoken to me, lied. Her complaint letter about Patel had been in wide circulation throughout the hospital for months, and in theory, anyone could have leaked a copy to me. In the lead up to Easter March 2005, my local paper magically filled with letters praising Patel and vilifying myself. The Nurses Union, who knew for months now how dangerous the American was, incredibly wrote a letter of support for Patel. The Queensland branch of the Australian Medical Association, the AMA, representing about 9,000 doctors, joined the pylon. Their chief executive, Kerry Gallagher, wrote an article for the AMA's Dr. Q magazine titled Plumbing New Depths. Mr. Gallagher wrote that I was plumbing depths of politics that normally would be too low even for the average bathysphere to reach. 10 days after my speech to Queensland Parliament on April Fool's Day 2005, the Australian Medical Association Queensland attacked me again publicly. They issued a media statement that inferred I had the blood of 5 teenage road accident victims on my hands. AMAQ's President Dr. David Malloy, speaking for 9,000 doctors, said, "The gaping hole left in the wake of Dr. Patel's departure was evident when an intensive care specialist was required to fly to Bundaberg to attend to an horrific car accident involving 5 teenagers over the Easter break. Rob Messenger has left Bundaberg with no surgical cover to help with accidents. It's an absolute disgrace that Dr. Patel has been forced to leave his job." The jokes on April Fool's Day 2005 didn't stop with the AMA press release. As most Australian media regurgitated the AMA scorn and government lies, Patel was sipping champagne on a one-way business class flight back to America, courtesy of the Queensland taxpayer. It was later revealed Bundaberg Hospital manager Peter Leck paid for Patel's flight out of Australia, but to this day no one has ever asked Mr Leck, who's now a doctor in West Australia, the name of the senior health official or politician who authorised the payment of Patel's one-way escape flight out of Australia. Most mainstream media ignored or scorned my Patel speech. However, on the 19th of April 2005, 4 weeks after I blew the whistle in Parliament, a tenacious investigative reporter, Hedley Thomas, after some brilliant sleuthing, had an article published titled "Nurses Hid Patients in Ward from Doctor Death." On that day, Labor Premier Peter Beattie was forced to announce a Royal Commission. It became harder for the government to cover up the truth. The Doctor Death horror show, victim by victim, was put on public display. Before coming to Australia, Patel, because of appalling patient harm, had been deregistered and banned in one US state and was limited in medical practice in another. According to senior AMA doctors I met, because the US surgeon committed criminal fraud while submitting his Queensland medical registration application, in the eyes of the law, Patel was never officially licensed or recognised as a doctor anywhere in Australia. That fraud meant every time Patel touched or treated any one of his 1,450 plus patients during the 2 years, April 2003 to March 2005, at the very least, it was criminal assault or worse. The Queensland Health Royal Commission found at least 87 patients had died under Dr. Death's care. This finding raised the prospect of scores of murder, manslaughter and unlawful killing charges, not to mention criminal charges for those responsible for negligently employing Patel and then covering up his crimes. Spoiler alert, no politician or health bureaucrat was ever charged with criminal neglect or for covering up Patel's crimes. It gets worse. Shocking evidence also emerged in the Royal Commission which showed Patel often didn't use anaesthetic or pain relief when operating. He showed callous disregard for screaming patients. More than one patient told me their horror story of how Patel seemed to enjoy their pain. One traumatised, sobbing victim told me that Patel had screamed at her to shut up, as she felt as if he raped her with a scalpel. The evidence showed the American fraudster sexually harassed young interns and regularly forged patient records. The Royal Commission found Patel didn't wash his hands between patients because, in his opinion, doctors don't have germs. Clearly, he wasn't normal. After I was voted out of Parliament in 2012, I received in writing and passed on to Lawrence Springborg, who is now the LNP Health Minister with a change of government, a written complaint by a nurse eyewitness claiming that Patel prepared to carry out a living autopsy on a terminally sick patient who was still alive. The Royal Commission raised our hopes. We thought that Patel would be locked up for decades on multiple murder or manslaughter charges, including Des Bramich's. We expected all victims, widows, widowers, families to receive justice and fair compensation. But in the end, after an FBI manhunt, while the Queensland Labor government pretended in public they didn't know how the killer got to America, and Patel's arrest, extradition to Australia in July 2008, government lawyers spectacularly bungled a series of Patel prosecutions, trials, appeals and retrials. The American fraudster, who stabbed Des Bramich in the chest 50 times, was never charged with any crime connected to the Agnes Waters man's death. No Queensland politician or bureaucrat was ever charged with any Patel-related offence. The Queensland government only paid a few hundred specially selected victims, a total of around $6 million compensation, which averaged out to $21,000 per person. Most Patel widows and widowers received just enough in compensation to bury their loved one, with a modest funeral costing $15,000. In total, Patel served just over 2 years in an Australian jail. Most people have bought the Queensland government lie that Jayant Patel was just an incompetent surgeon trying to do good but operating outside his area of expertise. After pleading guilty to 2 counts of fraud and being released from a Queensland jail, Dr. Death jetted back to America in time to have Christmas at home, December 2013. Unfortunately, Patel isn't the only American fraudster in Australia that I've run into who's committed serious crimes and then been protected by Australian high office holders.
Nora Basil McLean should not be trusted in any way, shape, or form. How he is able to reach into people of power is beyond me. But it doesn't say a whole lot about those people and their judgment of character and what they do to look into people. Like this guy here, I really hope people pay attention to what his history is. Norbert Basil McLean III is a fraud, a felon, and a thief. He's a thief.
Recently, I encountered another disgraced and convicted American conman who came here, changed his name, was hired by a Tasmanian senator, closely associated with an Australian Prime Minister, and was protected from criminal charges by a Governor-General and the head of our National Anti-Corruption Commission. But that story is for another day.
Lily! Yo!
Today, in the distance, Table Cape, majestic and rocky, plunges into Bass Strait's sparkling blue waters. It's paradise, and nearly Christmas in Tassie. I'm thinking about a murder in a place that's about 2,500 kilometres north, nearly 20 years ago.